Hey there, Alex Kidman here with my review of the Motorola Edge 60 Pro, which is, not surprisingly, the successor to last year's Edge 50 Pro. A phone which I sort of like for its design, but not much else. So has Motorola improved things? Well, in some ways, yeah, it has, and in other ways, no, it hasn't. It's made some really unusual choices with this phone, some of which I really rather like, and some of which I don't. Let's get into it. First of all, looking at the display. So what we're looking at here is a 6.7-inch OLED display, same as last year in terms of size, and like last year, it's a curved display. And I know, these are super contentious. Some people really love the look of this kind of display, and some people really hate it with a passion. There doesn't seem to be a middle ground. I am on the record as saying, well, look, actually, I don't mind a curved display. I think it gives it a certain point of style, and certainly there's not too many companies actually doing curved displays anymore. Maybe consumers have spoken. Maybe you've got an opinion on this. If so, let me know in the comments below. But Motorola has made some changes to this display, not all of them for the better. So on the plus side, this is a much brighter display with a peak rated brightness of 4,000 nits, up from 2,000 on the previous model. So it's really good in direct sunlight. However, this is a slower display, so where the Edge 50 Pro had a 144Hz display, this is just 120Hz. Now, does that matter a huge amount? Well, unless you're into your really twitchy Android gaming, probably not. 120Hz is probably enough for most people for kind of smooth web scrolling and stuff like that, but it's still never pleasing to see a downgrade in quality on a newer device. It's certainly a choice that Motorola's made there. Here in Australia, the Edge 60 Pro is only available in two colours. You've got Shadow, which is basic grey, or Sparkling Grape, which is what this is. And like so many of Motorola's phones, the back is vegan leather, and if you've watched any of my reviews, you'll know I really hate vegan leather. I just don't like the feel of it. This is the longest that this phone has actually spent without a case on it, because I dislike vegan leather that much. Thankfully, Motorola does provide a case. And it's an interesting one, because while it's just kind of thin and basic in a certain way, and obviously it's trying to match the colour, the one thing that it does do is it's got this kind of speckled effect. I don't know how well the camera's going to pick that up, but it looks different from the basic colour, which is just uniform across the body of the back of the phone. Still, nice and flat, not the most protective case, of course, the sides are still exposed here, but it works well enough. One thing I really do appreciate about the Edge 60 Pro is that it's nicely robust. Corning Gorilla Glass 7i for the primary display, and it's IP69 rated. Now, have I drowned it? Have I smashed it with a hammer? Well, no. I mean, look, it's right here. It's not broken. But also because, honestly, an awful lot of those tests that you see online on YouTube, they're not very good. And I've got a whole video that goes into why that is, if you want to go watch that. But the upside here is, yeah, this is a nice, or should be, a nicely durable phone, as long as you're not too stupid with it. On the camera front, the Edge 60 Pro features a 50 megapixel wide, 50 megapixel ultra wide, and 10 megapixel 3x optical zoom telephoto at the back. And then at the front, you're talking a 50 megapixel sensor for taking your selfies. And look, honestly, in the kind of price space that the Edge 60 Pro sits, Motorola's long had the problem that it hasn't really kept up with the state-of-the-art from the likes of Apple or Samsung or Google, and really, it still hasn't. This isn't a bad camera phone, and I do like having a triple lens setup because it does allow me to do lots of different experimental shots if I want ultra-wides, if I want telephoto zoom. It's all there, but none of the results are particularly spectacular. There's a very plain kind of look to most of the photos this takes. Now, obviously, yes, you can tweak near endlessly with apps or with Photoshop after the fact to get a certain kind of look, but straight out of the camera, this doesn't deliver particularly pleasing shots. They tend to be kind of muted. Low light could be a little bit better. Telephoto could also be a little bit better because, well, up to 3x is fine. Predictably, if you push it up to its maximum, which is 50, the results are just kind of awful. And again, just to be clear, I'm not saying this is a bad camera. I'm saying it should be a whole lot better. Another example there is it uses the ultra-wide lens for macro shots. And look, lots of phones do that. But it has an auto-sensing mode. And the issue that I have here is that when it auto-senses and thinks, oh, I better jump into macro mode, it changes the framing on you. Because of course it does, it's changing lenses. But this means that you can stuff perfectly good shots because it suddenly thinks, oh, this needs to be a macro. That shouldn't be in focus. And I really, really dislike that kind of thing. The Edge 50 Pro features a Qualcomm processor, but the Edge 60 Pro has jumped camps over to MediaTek. Specifically, we're talking a Dimensity 8350 Extreme processor paired up with 12 gig of RAM and 512 gig of fixed storage. No storage expansion, unfortunately, in play here. And here again, Motorola's playing with the big boys in this category. Well, at $1,199, this isn't the most expensive premium phone you can buy. It's quite up there in Motorola terms, and certainly there are competing phones from the likes of Samsung or Google or Apple that you could buy for this kind of money. So how does this compare? Well, first of all, let's have a look at how the CPU stacks up using Geekbench 6's CPU test. So the jump up here from the Edge 50 Pro is notable. I've included the Razer 60 there, by the way, because it also landed on my reviews desk at the same time as the Edge 60 Pro, and they both cost the same amount of money, so I think that's a fair enough comparison for a new phone. Still, this isn't right up there, but it's powerful enough. I've long said that for these kinds of phones, the level of power that you're getting is enough for most people in most situations. Still, you should probably go for the most power that you can get, because most people are buying phones to last 2, 3, 4 or more years, and having more power means you'll still have more power in 2, 3, 4 years. This doesn't quite hit those kinds of highs. It is a slightly closer race if you look at GPU performance using 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. But still, Apple and Samsung do have it beat here. You can do better for this kind of money. And again, this will suffice. It runs Android apps. There's really not a big issue there. If you can do better, why wouldn't you? On the software side, I've long favoured Motorola's approach to Android, which tends towards this cleaner style. I like that. I prefer that. Tastes, of course, can vary. You do still get fun stuff like the Moto Action, so if I chop this twice, if I chop this twice properly on camera, it's kind of difficult. There we go. If I chop this twice, it puts the spotlight on, because of course that's what you want. You want the flashlight to come on. It will come off, I promise you. I'm just holding it at a rather odd angle for filming. And if I twist it twice fast, it'll fire up the camera and you'll get a spectacular shot of the desk in front of me. Yeah, I'm doing a terrible job of that as well. Let me see if I can do this with my other hand a bit better. There we go. That's what I was actually going for. And look, those are decent enough. Of course, they're not unique to this particular phone, but they are a Motorola specialty, shall we say. I do like seeing them there. What I don't like seeing, though, is not competing quite well enough on the OS upgrades and updates front. And yeah, this doesn't, because what you're talking here is 3 OS upgrades and 4 years of security updates. And while that's better than some of the things Motorola's done in the past, when its competitors are doing 7 years of both, it doesn't compare well. Of course, premium phones in 2025 have to compete on the AI front, and Motorola's big play here is, well, it's this button at the side here. This is the Motorola AI button, and it launches a bunch of AI features. I'm not going to show these off on camera too much because it ties into your personal data, and I'm a private person. But essentially, it's sort of soft mimicking what Google already does with its own Google AI, and I'm at a bit of a loss to see that as a big plus. Now, I'm not a big AI user. I tend to find the results it gives are fairly poor, and as someone who works creatively, I'm not big on generative AI either, but Motorola's largely just duplicating here. I don't see anything particularly unique. It is also slightly annoying to me that this button is right here. It does run Motorola AI, but it doesn't run anything else. You can't configure it for other purposes, and that just feels like a missed opportunity to me. Of course, your viewpoint may differ. Let me know in the comments below. On the battery life front, the Edge 60 Pro is a thinner phone, and usually that has meant a lower battery capacity. But here, Motorola's done something fairly special because they've packed in a 6,000 milliamp hour battery. Now, that's a nice big battery, a nice big number. They make some big, bold claims about its battery life. But, well, how does that stack up? As always, battery life is super variable, because what you do with a phone might be different to what I do with a phone, and that could lead to your battery running out way faster than mine, or vice versa. So to give that some kind of comparative weighting, I ran it through my standard YouTube battery test to see how it would compare against the same models I've been comparing against for GPU and CPU power. Here's how it stacked up. Now, here it's actually done okay. That 94% figure for the first hour is kind of critical, because phones that drop below 90% in that test will typically struggle to last a whole day under moderate usage load. And here, yep, it's past that without too much trouble. And it's pleasing to see that the drop down to hour 2 and hour 3 is fairly uniform, and it's still reasonably high. Certainly in more anecdotal testing, yeah, look, all day unless you're absolutely hammering it, totally assured. 2-day, yeah, it's feasible if you're a light enough user, I guess. And that's, that's good. That's decent, while not necessarily being market leading. What you don't get with the Edge 60 Pro is any kind of charger, and while that's kind of standard for a lot of premium phones now, it is worth noting that the Edge 50 Pro came, at least here in Australia, came with a 125-watt charger in the box. No such beast in the Edge 60 Pro's box, but then it would be a waste of capacity, because the other issue here is that the Edge 60 Pro drops to just 90-watt charging. Now, that's still nice and fast, it's still reasonable, but considering its predecessor was faster, again, it's a very slight downgrade. It's a choice that Motorola's made, and it's not one that I think is an upgrade, because it isn't. So should you buy the Edge 60 Pro? Well, look, Motorola makes a lot of phones, and outside of that foldable space, where I think the Razr actually competes really nicely, and I am reviewing the Razr 60 at the same time. Look, here it is, review coming really, really soon. But outside of this phone, or outside of foldables, I should say, it's often struggled in that premium space to deliver stuff that's been really compelling. Really anything very, very bad, but just not stuff that really led the market, not stuff that said, this is the phone that you should buy. And that's the Edge 60's problem, really. It should be a better phone at this money, but it's just not. It's not a bad phone, but other phones outclass it for performance or for camera. Battery life is decent, and I do like that curved style, but you'd really have to love the curved style for this to be the best phone you could buy at this price. Now, we know phone prices drop over time, and it wouldn't take too much of a drop in price for this to be a really compelling option. When that happens, this will be a much easier phone to recommend. At launch, yeah, it's a bit harder for me to say that this is the phone you should buy. Thanks for watching.